It starts with a group of friends: Emily, Jack, Lisa, and Ben, who decided to spend the night at Emily's old rustic farmhouse. The isolated location and the house's creepy history excited them, hoping for a night of spine-tingling fun. As they settled in for the night, the wind outside howled like a ghostly specter. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows across the walls, creating an atmosphere that made even the bravest of hearts quiver. Emily, always the adventurous one, suggested they play a game to scare themselves even more. After a bit of discussion, they settled on playing a game called The Haunting. The rules were simple: one person would be the ghost, and the others would hide throughout the house. The ghost had to find and scare the others, who would have to remain hidden until dawn. It sounded like harmless fun at first. Emily volunteered to be the ghost, while the others scattered to find hiding spots throughout the old farmhouse. As they dispersed, the creaks and groans of the house only added to the spooky ambience. Emily covered her face with a white sheet and began her search, trying her best to make ghostly sounds. Lisa hid in the attic, clutching a teddy bear for comfort. Jack found a closet in the dimly lit hallway, and Ben squeezed into a small space under the staircase. They all waited, their nerves on edge, anticipating Emily's ghostly approach. But as the minutes passed, something felt off. Emily, playing the ghost, hadn't made any sounds or come looking for them. At first, they thought she was trying to scare them further, but as time went on, their fear escalated into genuine concern. They decided to end the game and called out for Emily, but there was no response. Panicking, they searched the house, calling her name louder and louder, but she was nowhere to be found. The farmhouse seemed to absorb their voices, swallowing their cries in its dark corners. Finally, they came across a mysterious trapdoor hidden beneath a dusty rug in the living room. None of them remembered seeing it before, and their hearts pounded in their chests. With trembling hands, they opened the trapdoor and peered down into the darkness. To their horror, they saw Emily lying unconscious at the bottom of a narrow, rickety staircase. They rushed to her side, shaking her awake, but she was disoriented and couldn't remember how she ended up there. The game had become a nightmare they couldn't escape. As they tried to leave the farmhouse to seek help, they discovered that all the doors and windows were locked from the outside. Panic took hold of them, realizing they were trapped inside the haunted house with no means of escape. The night wore on, and the atmosphere in the farmhouse grew increasingly oppressive. Strange noises echoed through the halls, and shadows seemed to move on their own. They were no longer sure if the hauntings were a part of the game or if something malevolent truly inhabited the house. In their desperate attempts to escape, they stumbled upon a hidden diary that belonged to a previous owner of the farmhouse. The diary spoke of dark rituals performed in the house, and a malevolent spirit that had been trapped within its walls. With growing dread, they realized that the spirit had been awakened by their game, seeking revenge for being disturbed. They had unwittingly invited a malevolent force into their midst, and now, their lives were at stake. As dawn approached, the farmhouse seemed to intensify its sinister energy. They could hear the ghostly footsteps of a malevolent presence drawing closer, and they knew they had to find a way to banish it before it was too late. With the help of the diary, they devised a ritual to cleanse the house and send the spirit back to where it came from. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, they gathered in the living room and began the ritual. The air crackled with energy as they recited ancient words of protection and purification. Suddenly, the house shook violently, and a chilling wind swept through the room. They held on tightly to each other, their eyes shut tight, hoping their efforts would work. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the shaking and wind ceased. The house fell eerily silent, and they cautiously opened their eyes. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and they felt a sense of peace settling over the farmhouse. They had successfully banished the malevolent spirit, but the events of that night would forever haunt their memories. They vowed never to play with forces they didn't understand again, and the farmhouse stood as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. From that night on, the old farmhouse became known as the Haunted Farmhouse. A place locals avoided and dared not speak of. But the friends who survived the terrifying sleepover knew the truth, the darkness that lay hidden within the walls, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims. Two best friends, Emily and Lily, decided to have a sleepover at Emily's house. They were both 10 years old and had been inseparable since they were little. Emily's parents were thrilled to see their daughter so happy and eagerly agreed to the sleepover. The girls spent the afternoon playing games, giggling, and having a great time. As evening approached, Emily's parents prepared a delicious dinner for them, and they all sat around the dining table, sharing stories and laughter. After dinner, they retreated to Emily's room, which was adorned with fairy lights and stuffed animals. They decided to watch a movie and chose a classic animated film. However, just as the movie started, a sudden power outage plunged the house into darkness. The girls weren't too bothered by it, as they had experienced power outages before. Emily's parents assured them that it was just a temporary outage and that the power would come back soon. They handed the girls a couple of flashlights and left the room to check on some candles. As the minutes passed, the girls started to feel a bit uneasy. The darkness outside was unsettling, and the wind howled against the windows, making eerie sounds. Emily tried to lighten the mood by telling silly jokes, and Lily laughed along, but they couldn't shake off the growing sense of unease. Suddenly, they heard a faint tapping sound on the window pane. They turned to look, and their hearts skipped a beat when they saw a figure standing outside. The dim moonlight cast a shadowy silhouette, and the figure seemed to be watching them. Terrified, they clutched each other's hands and whispered to each other. They couldn't decide if it was a prank or something more sinister. Emily wanted to call her parents, but her phone was downstairs, and she was afraid to leave the safety of her room. As they watched, the figure moved away from the window and disappeared into the darkness. The tapping sound stopped, but the girls were still on edge. They decided to wait a little longer before calling Emily's parents, hoping it was just a friend trying to scare them. Minutes felt like hours, and finally, Emily's parents returned with a couple of lit candles. The girls immediately blurted out what they had seen. Concerned, Emily's parents went outside to investigate while keeping the girls inside. After a thorough search around the house, they found no one. The girls were still frightened, but Emily's parents reassured them that it was probably a prank by a neighborhood kid, and there was nothing to worry about. They promised to keep a close eye on the house and told the girls to try and get some rest. Despite their fear, exhaustion eventually took over, and the girls managed to fall asleep, huddled together in Emily's room. In the morning, they woke up to the sound of birds chirping, the power restored, and the sun shining brightly. Emily's parents made a big breakfast, trying to lift the girls' spirits. They laughed about the previous night's events, and Emily and Lily agreed that it must have been a prank. The sleepover continued with more fun activities during the day, and as the day turned into evening again, the girls felt safe and happy once more. They never found out who was tapping on the window, but it remained a memorable and mysterious part of their sleepover. Two adventurous boys named Alex and Jake decided to have a sleepover at Alex's old secluded farmhouse. The house was surrounded by dense woods, and tales of strange happenings had circulated among the locals for generations. Ignoring the warnings, the boys were excited for a night of spooky fun. As evening fell, they settled into the living room, telling ghost stories and daring each other to explore the darkest corners of the house. The creaking floorboards and howling wind outside added to the eerie ambience, but they laughed it off as they tried to spook each other. As the night grew darker, Alex's pet dog, Max, began acting strangely. He would growl at seemingly nothing and occasionally darted his eyes towards the corners of the room. Brushing it off as Max being playful, the boys continued their ghostly tales. After a while, they decided to venture out into the woods with flashlights, hoping to find the rumored haunted graveyard nearby. The woods were eerily quiet, and the dense canopy of trees blocked most of the moonlight, making it feel like they were in a different world. As they walked deeper into the woods, they noticed strange symbols carved into the trees, and the air became colder. Alex's flashlight flickered, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. They were about to turn back when they heard a faint, eerie whisper carried by the wind. Chills ran down their spines, and they turned to flee, but a sudden gust of wind extinguished both their flashlights, plunging them into total darkness. Panic set in as they tried to find their way back to the farmhouse. Max began barking wildly, and his growls turned into an anguished whimper. The boys felt a presence closing in on them, and they stumbled over tree roots and branches in their desperate attempt to escape. They could hear faint footsteps behind them, but whenever they turned, there was nothing there. Finally, they saw the faint glow of the farmhouse in the distance, and they ran as fast as they could. As they burst through the front door, they noticed Max refused to come inside, barking and growling at the darkness outside. Trying to catch their breath, they locked the door and barricaded it with furniture. They thought they were safe inside, but the strange occurrences only intensified. The door started rattling, making the furniture move, and chilling whispers echoed through the house. With fear gripping their hearts, they decided to call Alex's parents for help. But as they picked up the phone, they discovered that there was no dial tone. The line seemed to be dead. They were trapped inside the haunted farmhouse with no means of communication or escape. The presence grew stronger, and the temperature plummeted. They huddled together, shivering with terror, and could feel an unseen force closing in on them. Suddenly, they heard a loud crash from upstairs. They cautiously climbed the stairs, and to their horror, they found a room with its door ripped off its hinges. Inside, they saw strange symbols drawn on the walls and an old dusty Ouija board lying on the floor. Before they could react, the planchette moved on its own, spelling out chilling messages. It claimed to be the spirit of a deceased owner of the farmhouse, seeking revenge on intruders, and it vowed to keep them trapped forever. With their hearts pounding, they rushed back downstairs, desperate to find a way to break free from the haunting. But the house seemed to have a life of its own, the walls closing in on them, and the eerie whispers growing louder. In their final attempt to escape, they mustered all their courage and decided to confront the spirit head-on. They found the Ouija board again and tried to communicate with the entity, pleading for their lives and promising to leave the house forever. The planchette moved violently, and the atmosphere in the room grew suffocating. The spirit demanded a sacrifice, and in their desperation, Alex and Jake agreed to leave something behind, a precious possession, to appease the malevolent entity. With tears in their eyes, they left their childhood toys as an offering on the Ouija board. Almost instantly, the room fell silent, and the haunting ceased. The malevolent presence seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind a sense of emptiness. Exhausted and terrified, they spent the rest of the night huddled together, waiting for the first light of dawn. As the sun rose, the house felt calm and serene, as if the night's horrors had been a mere nightmare. In a bustling college town, two best friends, Rachel and Sarah, decided to have a sleepover in their dorm room. It was Halloween night, and excitement filled the air as they planned to watch scary movies, share ghost stories, and immerse themselves in the spooky festivities. As the night fell, they dimmed the lights in their small dorm room and settled in for a night of eerie fun. The campus was buzzing with Halloween parties, but the girls were content to enjoy their own little spooky gathering. As they began watching a horror movie, they heard a strange scratching sound coming from the window. They glanced over, thinking it might be a tree branch or a bird, but the noise persisted and grew louder. The window seemed to fog up, making it difficult to see what was outside. Unnerved, they decided to close the curtains and focused on the movie, trying to brush off the eerie occurrence as their imaginations playing tricks on them. But the scratching sound continued intermittently, and they found it increasingly difficult to ignore. Feeling brave, Sarah suggested they investigate the noise. Armed with a flashlight, they slowly approached the window, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they pulled the curtain aside, they gasped in horror. A pale, ghostly hand was pressed against the window, with long bony fingers reaching towards them. Frozen in fear, they watched as the hand slid down the glass, leaving a chilling trail of condensation behind. Sarah quickly snapped out of her shock and shouted for help. They called campus security, who arrived promptly to investigate. However, when they checked outside, there was no sign of anyone or anything that could have caused the disturbance. The security officer assured them it was likely a prankster trying to spook them on Halloween night. Though somewhat relieved, the girls still felt uneasy as they locked their dorm room door tight. Trying to regain their composure, they continued their sleepover activities. But as they settled back into the movie, they noticed a strange flickering light outside the window. The light seemed to dance around, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate again, this time peering out through a small opening in the curtains. To their horror, they saw a group of hooded figures, carrying lit candles and swaying rhythmically in a circle. The sight sent shivers down their spines, and they quickly shut the curtains. They were too frightened to call security again, fearing that the figures might hear them and escalate the situation. As the night wore on, they could still hear faint chanting and occasional tapping on the window. The atmosphere inside the dorm room grew oppressive, and they felt a malevolent presence surrounding them. Desperate to break the tension, they turned on all the lights and tried to distract themselves with more light-hearted activities. But the eerie events continued, and they could feel the dark energy lingering around them. Finally, at the first light of dawn, the disturbing occurrences ceased. Exhausted and shaken, they vowed to never have another sleepover on Halloween and decided to stay away from any spooky rituals or games in the future. Thank you again for joining us for another video. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe and comment down below and let us know what you would like to hear in the near future. See you all again soon.